worship and song, we'll ask James Schmidt to word our opening prayer. We'll chase the wind again tonight. I really hope we find wind. And Ronnie Moore will be wording our closing prayer. Robert?
First song this evening will be number 560. 560. Lesson. It'll be number 939. 939 be the song after the lesson. And before the lesson, we'll sing number 555. 555. After we sing this song, James Schmidt will lead us in opening prayer.
you all bow, please. Heavenly Father, we just want to thank you for bringing us all here today to learn more from your word. And we just want to thank you for all the blessings that you have given us and shown us. And we ask that you touch everyone that's here and watching you today. Minister to us. Let us learn what it is that you want us to learn and hear what it is that you want us to hear. Touch our hearts for you and help us focus upon your word. And we ask that you be with all those that are doing your work and that you just minister to them and give them the strength they need. Be with Jeff, help him to remember all that he prepared from your word. And may you be glorified in our lives and through our lives, and may your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And we ask this of you in your holy Son, Jesus Christ's name. Amen.
And yes, we are chasing the wind once again, but it has that's kind of the theme for the whole study of the book of Ecclesiastes. Our lesson tonight, which is in chapter 9, if you've got your Bibles with you, focuses upon our deeds being in the hand of God. Our deeds being in the hand of God. And I want to begin with just a question, maybe a couple of questions, get us thinking in that direction. First of all, it's this. Are there things in your life about which you have no knowledge? You can probably say, of course. How many of you can say you know exactly what tomorrow holds for you? You may know what you've planned for tomorrow. You may know what you hope to accomplish tomorrow, but you don't always know what tomorrow holds. If there's anything we've learned from making deliveries, we've kind of got a theme on the truck. It is life is an adventure, because we are always running into something that we haven't run into before. Yesterday, matter of fact, I get out to help with the first delivery after the nursing home reading and find out that the couch is missing a leg. And the reason is because the insert that the leg screws into is fallen out inside the couch. So we had to do a little assembly before we could leave that, and took a little while to find the insert to finally be able to put it back in place so that we could finish that delivery. So we're always experiencing things like that and just learning how to roll with the punches and keep going. But you know, if you think about it, most of the people, not most, all of the people, I dare say, that lived in this community in the area that was flooded last year, if you were to ask them on Friday night, August the 20th, when you went to bed, did you have any idea? You were expecting rain because that's what was in the forecast, but did you have any idea that in 12 hours' time you would be without a home and without most of your personal possessions and having to start all over again? I dare say that every one of them would have said, I had no clue that that was what was about to happen to me. We had a football team that came home off of a victory that night, having defeated in the Battle of the Bridge, Camden. And they came home along with their parents and fellow students and coaches expecting a great season on their home field, did not know that as a result of the flood, they wouldn't get to play on that field for another year. So we don't always know what's going to happen tomorrow. We're unable to predict what's going to happen to us. And whether that will happen, whether it's going to be good or bad, and whether our efforts in different areas of our lives are going to succeed or fail. We plan to succeed. We hope to succeed. We make in things we work toward succeeding, but we don't always know that that's what's going to happen. So what does Solomon do here in chapter 9? In chapter 9, he addresses, as a matter of fact, not just this chapter, but over the next 3 chapters, he addresses these issues, and twice here in chapter 9, he uses a phrase. The phrase is, if you look in verse 2 or verse 12, man does not know. And he begins to tell us, here's what you don't know. You think you know, but you really don't. And then in chapter 10, verse 14, he will come back and say, no man knows. And in chapter 11, twice, verse 2 and verse 6, he just comes back and says, you do not know. So folks, there are things about life, no matter how much we wish we knew, we don't know. And in our present chapter, what Solomon does is he reminds us of two things. The first is that death is unavoidable. All of us will experience it, provided the Lord tarries his coming. The second is that life is unpredictable. And when you think about those two concepts, they can be pretty depressing. The fact that you're not going to avoid death, and the fact that you cannot predict what's going to happen in your life, whether good or bad. And yet, I know they seem depressing, but what Solomon does is he shares with us some wisdom as to how we are to approach that and what we are to think about, where our focus is to be. So let's delve into that. And we're going to begin with this first one. First 10 verses kind of look at this concept that death is unavoidable. And the first thing he says there in verse 1 is this: I've taken all this to heart and explain it, that righteous men, wise men, and their deeds are in the hand of God. Man does not know whether it will be love or hatred. Anything awaits him. When Solomon says, I've taken all this to heart, he said, I've considered it. I've laid it to heart. I've reflected on it. It's the things that he has learned from his observations, from his experiences. And his conclusion, if you'll notice, it's that righteous men, wise men, and their deeds are in the hand of God. Ultimately, our fate is in the hand of God. That term, if you look in there are two concepts in the Bible. One is hand, the other is arm. They are biblical metaphors, and they are biblical metaphors denoting power. 200 times in the Old Testament, we find it used to refer to the sovereign power of God. And it refers to God's power in 4 different areas of our lives. One is His creative power. In Psalm 19, verse 1, David would write, the heavens are telling the glory of God, and their expanse is declaring or proclaiming the work of His hands. And in Isaiah 48, verse 13, it's something that God says. He says, surely my hand founded the earth, my right hand spread out the heavens. So there is that creative power of God that's, often referred to as being His hands. But then there's that judgmental power of God. And in Isaiah 19, verse 6, there's a statement that was made about, and this is looking forward to when God will once again bring judgment upon Egypt. And He says, in that day, and anytime you see that phrase, in that day, God is looking forward to a time when He is going to intervene in something involving history. In that day, the Egyptians will tremble, He says, and be in dread because of the waving of the hand of the Lord of hosts, which He is going to wave over them. There again, God's hand, God's judgmental power. Zechariah chapter 2, verse 9, God says there, for behold, I will wave my hand over them so that they will be plunder for their slaves. So there is the power of God in judgment in His hands. Then there is the saving power of God. Go back to the book of Exodus, specifically concerning the Egyptians and Israel and the power of God. And there in verse 31 of Exodus chapter 14, when Israel saw the great power which the Lord used against the Egyptians. This is in reference to destroying Pharaoh's army in the Red Sea. The people feared the Lord, and they believed in the Lord and in His servant Moses. There again, it is God's power in His hands, but it's saving power this time in that He used that power to save His people. And the last one that it's often used is God's protective power. A couple of individuals, Ezra, Nehemiah. Both of them will make their way back to Jerusalem for the purpose of helping to rebuild the walls or to rebuild the gates. And first of all, in Ezra chapter 7, verse 9, he talks about on the first of the first month, he began to go up from Babylon. And he says, on the first of the 5th month, he came to Jerusalem because the good hand of God was upon him. God's protective power. And then Nehemiah, in Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 18, he makes a statement, I told them how the hand of my God had been favorable to me. So God, there again, His protective power. When we speak about our lives being in the hands of God. Folks, that's true of us as Christians. We have hope because of that very fact. Let me give you something that Peter says over in 1 Peter chapter 5. There in verse 6 and 7, he says, "Humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God." Why? That He may exalt you at the proper time, casting all your anxiety on Him because He cares for you. If we humble ourselves under His mighty hand, then that protective hand, that guiding hand is going to uplift us. It's going to carry us. So what is Solomon telling us here? When he tells us that our lives are and our deeds are in the hand of God, what he's saying is that since we don't know the providence of God, and we cannot determine whether we're going to experience prosperity or adversity, or whether we will be an object, as he says here, of love or of hate, we trust ourselves to the hand of God. We know that we're in His safekeeping, and we lean upon Him. But he also goes on to make a point that is true of every single living human being. It is that all of us are subject to the same fate. If you'll notice there, beginning in verse 2, he says it's the same for all. There is one fate, and notice how he begins to distinguish. One fate for the righteous and for the wicked, for the good, for the clean, and for the unclean. For the men, he says, the man who offers a sacrifice, and for the one who does not sacrifice. So he's looking at both sides of the spectrum. As a good man, so is the sinner. As a swearer, so is one who is afraid to swear. So you've got all of these different groups of people on different sides of the coin, so to speak. And he says it's the same under the sun for all of these. What is it? It is that we all go to the dead, into verse 3. And he makes a statement between those. If you'll notice there, he says, verse 3, this is an evil in all that is done under the sun, that there is one fate for all men, but furthermore, the hearts of the sons of men are full of evil, and insanity is in their hearts throughout their lives. Don't you think about that statement? Furthermore, the hearts of the sons of men are full of evil, and insanity is in their hearts throughout their lives. What does he mean? I like something that Warren Wiersbe, who writes a commentary on this, had to say. He said, the fact of death and the fear of death will bring out the best in people or the worst in them. Now think about that for just a moment. The fact of death will bring out either the best in people or the worst in them. And he says, too often it is the worst. According to him, when death comes to a family, it doesn't create problems, it reveals them. If there are problems in that family, more often than not, the death of a family member is going to bring out those problems. Though, you ever seen families that begin fighting with each other after the death of a loved one? That death just freed it up for that to finally come out. The animosity's been there, but the death brought it out. But on the other occasion, you will see there are families that seem to come together in a death because already that family was a close family. They cared about each other. And he makes another comment that people will do almost anything but repent in order to, as he says, escape the reality of death. There are some people that will begin drinking because they don't want to acknowledge that death is coming. People that will engage in behaviors that you would think, why in the world would you do that? But they don't want to deal with the concept of death in their lives. I've seen it, and I'm sure Kyle has too. We've dealt with families at funerals, families after deaths, and we've seen the responses of different families to the loss of a loved one and what it does to that family, but some of those things are already there, already in place. And so, as Solomon says, the hearts of the sons of men are full of evil, and insanity is in their hearts throughout their lives. And sometimes all that happens is that death just brings that out. But even with that, Solomon brings out something else in verses 4 through 6, and that is that life is preferable to death. And he tells us why. He says that whoever is joined with all the living, for whoever is joined with all the living, there is hope. With the living, there is hope. And then he uses an example. He says this, surely a live dog is better than a dead lion. And a dog in that day and time was not a tender little pet that they kept in their house and all fluffed up and had their own little pillow that they lied on. Dogs were scavengers. Dogs ate whatever was thrown out. People didn't typically have dogs as pets like we do so much today. But even a despised scavenger that is alive, he's saying, is better than the mightiest of the beasts, the lion. Why? Because the dog is at least alive, whereas the lion is dead. And the point he's making is, if you're dead, there is nothing. There is no hope. You've already gone. The living have consciousness. The living have hope. They have things they can look forward to and can enjoy. He says, for the living know they will die, but the dead do not know anything. Why? Because the dead is no longer conscious of anything. Nor have they any longer a reward. Their memory is forgotten. You see, they don't know anything. They don't hope, which he calls their reward. And folks, Solomon is not describing what the state of the dead is. What he's describing is what it is not. And what he's saying to us is that there are things that a person can no longer do, can no longer expect to be able to do because they're no longer here. You see, indeed, he says, their love, their hate, and their zeal have already perished. A person who's passed from this life can no longer love someone because they're not physically here to do that. A person who has passed from this life can no longer hate anyone and express that hate because they're not here. That it can no longer demonstrate zeal for something, energy to accomplish a task because they're no longer here. If you go to the book of Isaiah chapter 38, Isaiah tells us about, you may remember King Hezekiah, when Isaiah was told to go into King Hezekiah and tell him to set his house in order because he was fixing to die. He rolls over in his bed. Isaiah has gone out. He rolls over in his bed and begins praying to God. And God sends Isaiah back and says, I'm going to give you 15 more years. Well, in Isaiah 38, Isaiah records for us something that Hezekiah writes to God about his inability, if he's no longer here, the things he can no longer do for God. And in verse 11, one of the things he says is, I said, I will not see the Lord in the land of the living. I will look on man no more among the inhabitants of the world. He says, I can't see what you're doing anymore because I'm not here to see it. I can't look on those people who live here anymore because you have taken my life. I can't do that anymore. And then if you go down a little bit in chapter 38 to verses 18 and 19, he even comes back and says, for Sheol cannot thank you. Now Sheol in the New American Standard, it's the place of the dead. Sometimes translated as hell in the Old King James, but it's not the hell of torment. It's just the place where the dead go. And he says, death cannot praise you. Those who go down to the pit cannot hope for your faithfulness. It is the living who gives thanks to you today as I do. So his point is, when I'm no longer here, I can't praise you. I can't thank you. I can't talk to others about you because that has been taken away from me. So, what does Solomon say that we should do? As I said, this can be depressing, but in view of the uncertainties of the future, and what they may bring, whether they bring adversity or prosperity, as he brought out in verses 1 through 3, and also in view of the uncertainty of death and the loss of opportunity and enjoyment of those opportunities that he shared with us in verses 4 through 6, Solomon recommends that you and I, and this is not the first time he's done this, but he recommends that you and I enjoy life as God's good gift to us. And he spells it out in greater detail here than perhaps anywhere else in some of the details that he's shared up to this point as we've been reading through this letter. Because if you'll notice here, he starts out with this: "Go then, eat your bread in happiness, drink your wine with cheerful heart, for God has already approved your works." He's saying, enjoy those cheerful gatherings together, those cheerful meals. But I want you to think about something. Solomon had 300 wives, 700 concubines. He always, if you go back to 1 Kings chapter 11 and you look at all of the things that he had prepared for him and the amount of food that was just made available. So you had this large family that was eating. I don't know if they were always with him or not. But don't you think about something. Did Solomon enjoy peace in his home? Was there strife in his home? If you've got 300 wives, I would think there's going to be a little bit of strife and a little bit of jealousy there amongst the children of those wives, vying for affection or vying for later having the throne. Remember what happened with David. He had that with 2 of his sons. So there's a couple of passages in Proverbs that may give us an insight into what it might have been like at Solomon's table. Because in Proverbs 15 verse 17, Solomon makes this statement. He says, "Better is a dish of vegetables where love is than a fattened ox served with hatred." Think about that for just a moment. Would you rather have a feast and there be strife at the table and everybody's arguing and fussing with each other, or would you rather have a little bit less and everybody is getting along? Or Proverbs 17 verse 1, "Better is a dry morsel with quietness with it than a house full of feasting with strife." There again, which would you rather have? So Solomon is saying, if God has given you life, take the time to enjoy what God has given you. If you have the privilege of enjoying a meal with a cheerful heart, thank God for it and enjoy that meal. Enjoy the times when there is peace at the table, times when you can truly laugh and cherish the moments. But also, he talks about let your clothes be white all the time and not be lacking oil on your head. Well, white clothes was a sign typically of joyfulness. An anointment was also a sign of blessing. And what he's saying, it seems to be, is listen, enjoy the things that God has blessed you with and let that be seen. Don't dress in such a way that you always make people think, well, life is terrible. But look for things in life to enjoy and cherish those moments. And the last thing that he brings out here, if you'll notice, is enjoy life with the woman whom you love all the days of your fleeting life, which he has given you under the sun. Enjoy the time that you have with your wife or your husband, because you don't know how long that's really going to last, do you? Enjoy that time. Look for the moments to laugh, to cherish, to remember the things that maybe you've done years ago. Proverbs 18 verse 22, Solomon would write, "He who finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains favor from the Lord." And I'd say that she who finds a good husband finds blessing from God and is blessed because of what God has done. But what is he doing? Through all of this, what Solomon is saying to us is, look at the simple things that you do, the simple routine. Look at even the repetitive routine that you're into in your life and just enjoy that. Enjoy that. How many of us know of someone that has lost a loved one, and one of the things they miss the most is every morning he would fix my coffee. Or every morning she would do this for me. Or I remember she would always walk through at the same time every day doing this or whatever. And just the little things that you remember, you cherish. It's sad that we wait until after a person is gone to cherish those things, but Solomon is saying, in view of what we don't know about life and what we cannot predict about our lives, look at the things you have now and cherish them and enjoy them and thank God for them. And even with our labor, he tells us to labor while you can. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might, for there is no activity or planning or knowledge or wisdom in Sheol where you are going. He's already encouraged us to enjoy life as God has enabled, and Solomon encouraged us to work diligently. But, if you think about the time in which Solomon reigned, most of the work that people did was physical labor with their hands. They had hand tools, whether it was the sickle for getting in the wheat or a rake or a hoe or something like that, or a carpenter's tool of some kind, or some kind of sewing instrument that one of the ladies may have used. All of these things, these tools, and they would use those tools with their hands. But there would come a point in time where age would prevent them from being able to do that anymore. It was time to hand those tools over to a younger man or to a younger lady who would pick that up and learn from you and go on and carry that on. And you knew, I'm not able to do it anymore. I just can't hold out like I used to. And so what Solomon is saying is, listen, whatever you find to do, while you can do it with all your might. Pour your energy into it. Do it with your passion and your zeal, because there's coming a time when you can't do it anymore. And how many people have we heard as they've gotten older that always reminisce about what their life was and things they did from years ago? Why do they do that? Because I can't do that anymore. I'm not that young man I used to be. I don't have the energy I used to have. I'm not the young woman that I used to be. And so, as he concludes this right here, he says there is no activity or planning or knowledge or wisdom in Sheol. You can't plan for tomorrow when you're no longer alive. The wisdom is already, that you've gained, it's already gone. You won't be able to draw from that once you pass from this life. Your time to do anything that you want to do, Solomon is saying, is now. And God has given you that time. But then in the second half of this chapter, beginning in verse 11, what he tells us is that life is unpredictable. He began this chapter with the statement that the righteous and the wise are both subject to the same fate as anyone else. And in verses 2 through 10, he discussed the fact that with regard to the righteous, but he's contrasted them with the wicked. Now what he does is he shows us that even the wise, because he's been focusing over the last few chapters, 7 and 8, now 9, on wisdom. And what he's telling us now is that even the wise are subject to an uncertain future. And in verses 11 and 12, he kind of brings that out. He says, I saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift, the battle is not to the warriors, neither is bread to the wise, nor wealth to the discerning, nor favor to men of ability, for time and chance overtake them all. And he adds to it, man does not know his time, like fish caught in a treacherous net, birds trapped in a snare, to the sons of men, or so the sons of men are ensnared at an evil time when it suddenly falls on them. So here's the thing. First of all, the race is not always won by the swiftest runner. A victory in battle is not always won by the mightiest soldiers. And many of us have lived long enough to know that a football game, a baseball game, a basketball game, or any other sport is not always won by the best team. My dad used to say to me that any team can beat any other team on a given day. And we've seen it happen. And so he says, the wise man is not always assured of earning a living, gaining food or bread, or getting rich, or acquiring a great reputation. And he tells us why. Why do these failures happen. He says, time and chance overtakes them all. Sometimes events just work against us. But I worked so hard. I put away. I laid back. I prepared. Job was the wealthiest man in the East. And folks, in one day it was all gone. Joseph was a prisoner with nothing other than maybe the clothes on his back and a few essential items. But at the age of 30, he suddenly became second in command of all Egypt. What a change in fortune. Time and chance. God, our times are in God's hands. And the point he makes, if you look at verse 12, is that none of us are able to predict those times. Time, as he says, man does not know his time. And Solomon even compares those misfortunes to cruel things. The treacherous or cruel or evil net in which fish are caught is one of his examples. The snare in which birds are trapped. And even as those two things catch the fish and the birds, he says, evil times fall upon men. You and I, at some point in our lives, may find that we fall into one of those traps, evil times. And so he just tells us, you need to understand that just because you're wiser than the average person in the room doesn't mean that you're going to be in the wealthiest group at the end of the day. Just because you're a harder worker than somebody else, just because you put back more than somebody else does not mean that at the end of the day you're going to be better off, because things do happen in life. And he even uses a little illustration. I think it's kind of interesting. He talks about this unrewarded wisdom, and the reason is because of negligence. The illustration has to do with a poor wise man, I should say, who delivers a city that has had siege laid to it by a great king. Here's the way he puts it. He says, I came to see as wisdom under the sun, and it impressed me, he says. There was a small city with few men in it, and a great king came to it, surrounded it, constructed large siege works against it, but there was found in it a poor wise man, and he delivered the city by his wisdom. Now think about that for just a moment. A small city, unable to really defend itself against this king with great power and large army. And so this king comes and lays siege to it, but this poor wise man is able to deliver the city by his wisdom. You would think that the city would recognize that poor wise man and reward him because he had saved them. He had kept them from being overrun by this great king with his army. But that's not the case. If you'll notice what Solomon goes on to say is this, yet no one remembered the poor man. No one remembered the man that had saved them, the man that had helped defeat the king and his army or kept them from being overrun. And he says, so I said, wisdom is better than strength, but the wisdom of the poor man is despised, and his words are not heeded. Wisdom is better than strength because wisdom helped him overcome the strength of this army, but the wisdom of the poor man was despised. You see, he remained poor. He remained unremembered, unrewarded with any kind of wealth or social esteem, even though he had been the salvation of that city. So just because we may do great deeds and accomplish great works does not mean that people will always appreciate us and show us the proper recognition. And Solomon says, understand that. And sometimes even the value of wisdom is nullified by a little folly. It's the way he ends up this chapter. And the thoughts continue on, but we're not going to get into chapter 10 until next week. He says, the words of the wise heard in quietness are better than the shouting of a ruler among fools. Wisdom is better than weapons of war. Now I want to stop there for just a moment with those two things, because he gives us an example of the poor wise man, a man whose wisdom did not benefit him, but now he shows us how valuable wisdom is, but he's also going to show us how vulnerable it is too. He tells us of the value, as I've just shared with you. The words of the wise heard in quietness are better than the shouting of a ruler among fools. Sometimes there's a man that does not try to really put himself forth, but his words, if you'll stop and listen to what he's saying, they're wise words. But then you've got another man that's shouting over this wise man. The wise man's wisdom is better. But you've got that shouting ruler among fools. And he says that the vulnerability of this wisdom is seen in the fact, notice this one statement, that one sinner destroys much good. One person. May have been that shouting individual that everybody listened to because he's talking above everybody else, and he's the one that, you ever heard the saying, the wheel that squeaks the loudest gets the most grease? You don't listen to the ones you need to listen to. You listen to the one that keeps shouting at you, the one that keeps complaining, the one that keeps telling you what you should have done, rather than all the others that may be telling you quietly, this is where we need to go, or this is what we need to do, with wisdom trying to address the situation. And the last word is probably heard from the one who shouts the loudest. And I said we're not going to go into chapter 10, but I've got to touch verse 1. I don't have it up here for you, but I want you to listen to what he says, because he's telling us what's the result when we don't listen to the wise, poor wise man, and we listen to the shouting. He says that dead flies make a perfumer's oil stink, so a little foolishness is weightier than wisdom and honor. Dead flies make a perfumer's oil stink. You see, it'll destroy the good of the wise. A little foolishness. That's what will happen. It destroys the good that could be done because of listening to the wrong person. I want to conclude the lesson tonight by taking you back to one of our first point of the evening, and the fact that death is unavoidable. There's a couple of points, a couple of things I want to share with you, something else that Mr. Wearsby said in his commentary. And it's this one. I read this, I shared it with my wife last night. I thought, this is really good. It is this statement: death is no accident. It is an appointment. Think about that. Your death is not an accident. It is an appointment. Hebrews 9 verse 27, it is appointed unto man once to die. That is your appointment. If God tarries his coming, that is your appointment. And he goes on to say, it is a destiny that nobody but God can cancel or change. You cannot cancel it. You cannot change it. You cannot say, can you make that at a later date? Can't do that. But here's another statement he made that I thought was interesting too. It is this: we each share a common destiny here on earth. Death and the grave. But we do not share a common destiny in eternity. Think about that for just a moment. All of us will share a common destiny with everyone that lives in this world or has lived in this world. All of us, according to Solomon, we're going to die. We're going to go to the grave. But we don't all share a common destiny in eternity. We make a choice about where we want to spend an eternity. If you look at 1 Corinthians chapter 15, the great chapter on the resurrection, Paul makes a statement in verse 26 of that chapter in which he says the last enemy that will be abolished is death. 28 verses later, in verse 54, he declares death is swallowed up in victory. Now that's for those of us who are Christians. Death is swallowed up in victory. Who makes this victory possible? God. How does he make it possible? Through Jesus Christ. Because if you look in verse 57, It's as if Paul almost seems to be shouting the answer, and I've got it up here before you. But thanks be to God who gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. If you're a Christian here tonight, you are a possessor of that victory. God has granted you a victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. It is the victory over the last enemy, which is death. Death will no longer have its... You may die, but it doesn't have the last say in your life, because you will be raised with everyone else that has gone before you and everyone else who will go after you, who is a part of the Lord's body, who is a Christian, to a new life in a new body, which will never die, which will never become sick, which will never become tired. And the question for each of us is, will I be a participant in that victory? And the answer, found in a whole other book, Colossians chapter 3, verse 3, is yes, if your life is hidden with Christ in God. Is your life hidden with Christ in God? How does your life become hidden with Christ? You must die with Him to an old life and be buried with Him so that that sin can die, be taken away, removed, and then rise to walk in a newness of life, as Paul calls it in Romans chapter 6. It's called baptism. It's where God's mercy and grace step in and take away your sin. So the question tonight is, are you willing to do that if you haven't already done it? If you've already done it, you have a victory. Encamped along the hills of light, where Christian soldiers rise and press the battle ere the night shall veil the glowing skies. Against the foe and veils below, let all her strength be hurled. Faith is the victory that overcomes the world. It's the only way that you will have an eternity with God. And I pray that that's true of each of you. But if there's anyone here tonight for whom it's not true, this invitation is for you, and it's God's invitation. It's not mine, it's His. He invites you to come. And if you need to do so, won't you do so tonight as together we stand and sing.